Before I dive in, I'm going to give a little disclaimer for this sermon. It's a bit of a neck-breaking tour through a lot of ideas rather quickly. Enjoy. Sit back. There is no quiz. So the title of this sermon, Killing the Buddha, may seem very strange to some of you. It comes from a very famous koan, a sort of riddle from Zen Buddhist master Lin Ji. It says, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. You heard that correctly. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Obviously, there's a little bit of interpretation to be done. In the Zen tradition, koans are often paradoxical statements, and the effort you put into solving them kind of exhausts the analytical mind and creates space for a more intuitive way of knowing. One of the sort of classic examples refers to the sound of one hand clapping. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him is a koan. So everyone hearing it knows it's a little bit of a riddle, right? Beyond being a riddle, the command is more symbolic than literal. The road, the killing, and even the Buddha in this are symbols. The road likely refers to the path of enlightenment. And in Buddhist tradition, that path meanders through your spiritual practices and your daily life, including your job and your families and even what you eat and how you occupy your minds. So the path could refer to any moment. The next piece of symbolism of this story that needs unpacking is the Buddha. Too often in the Western world, we think of the Buddha as this individual historical figure that delivered teachings. But that word, Buddha, actually means enlightened one. And everyone, to some extent, contains a natural inclination to enlightenment. So in this koan, the Buddha isn't the happy guy in the robes that you see in statues. The Buddha in the koan is a catch-all for enlightenment. It could be our personal enlightenment or a perfectly written truth that we want to hang on to, or another person that you see that has achieved spiritual perfection. The Buddha just generally means our vision of enlightenment. And obviously, killing is not literal. I mean, Buddhists encourage a vegetarian diet. They're certainly not advocating murdering their spiritual leaders. As I'm sure you figured out, killing here means letting go of or critiquing. But I do think the word choice is really interesting. Kill is strong language. And thinking we've found the fundamental truth is incredibly seductive. I suspect that severe instruction to kill reflects the severe action needed to temper those moments of absolute certainty and hubris that we sometimes fall into. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. As Connie said, our theme for worship this month is ambiguity and paradox. And this week, the paradox that I hope we can chew on a little bit is how to cultivate some serious faith commitments and still leave room for uncertainty and growth. Now, you'll often hear Unitarian Universalist leaders referring to us as a liberal faith tradition. That's not a political stance. The word liberal, in the way we use it, comes from the Latin liberalis, or free. We seek the best answers we can find in community with the information available, and we do it freely. We know that truth continues to be revealed, and with more information in the future, our understanding of what is true will probably change. Liberalism that's so important to us comes out of a particular moment in history. And it's accompanied by a few really important theological ideas. I want to explain each of them very briefly. You've probably heard of John Locke, the 17th century English philosopher. You at least have heard the name. In addition to writing about democracy, Locke was also a bit of a theologian. And he argued that simple reason led one to clear proof of God. He and a lot of his contemporaries were known as deists. They held that all the central truths of religion, including what we know about God, could be derived from reason alone. Now, to be fair, these deists used their reason to come up with support for the same beliefs that they had always held. But what was a big shift here, and what we still carry today, is that our individual use of reason, not a sacred text or what someone told us from long, long ago, but our reason today is one of the best paths to understanding the sacred that we have. On the heels of John Locke came David Hume. You might have heard of him as well. He argued that because awareness of God occurred as an experience beyond our everyday senses, reason wasn't necessarily a useful way of understanding God. He said that because reason can't support or disprove theological claims, the only sensible stance is refined skepticism. And that's about the most Unitarian thing I've ever heard. Identifying the limits of reason and our limited capacity to know the universe, he carved out space for the agnostics among us with refined skepticism. The third theologian that I want to mention is a guy named Friedrich Schleiermacher. You probably have not heard of him. He wrote about our own internal emotions as a way of understanding religious truth. According to Schleiermacher, we don't think our way into understanding God or use science on that path. Instead, through self-awareness, through sensing that our very existence depends on something greater than ourselves, we have cause to be grateful. And for the very ground of our being, we intuitively sense the action of the universe gave rise to our being, and we feel compelled to respond. Three very different pathways: reason, skepticism, intuition. Each of them are embraced in our tradition. That's part of what leads us Unitarian Universalists to having such a wide range of beliefs. We've taken different paths sometimes to arrive where we land. And in a community, we hold on to those beliefs somewhat lightly, because we know that we can also learn from the person sitting next to us and their journey. In his book, Faith Without Certainty, Paul Razor tells us, religious liberalism often involves a willingness to affirm faith without certainty. This isn't the same thing as faith without conviction. It does mean that religious liberals tend to hold faith claims with a tentativeness. There are at least a few very different ways of knowing that inform our Unitarian Universalist faith. This week, as we consider how to hold our beliefs lightly, how to kill the Buddha, as they say, I think it's also worth remembering that our understanding of the world is the result of some radical, big shifts across history. In the ministers' reading group this month, we're reading a book called A God That Could Be Real: Spirituality, Science, and the Future of Our Planet. The author, Nancy Ellen Abrams, takes a really super scientific approach to trying to describe a God that makes sense to her in the context of the really best scientific knowledge about the cosmos today. She and her husband had been working to understand the significance of dark matter and dark energy in the cosmos. And consensus is growing that it's really big and important. In fact, it may be why galaxies exist, why these stars clump together around different areas. In this process, she starts to explain how our ideas about God have evolved dramatically, along with our understanding of astronomy and our place in the world. What we know has changed in ways that we never could have imagined. Long before monotheism emerged, leading up to Judaism, there were a great many gods. Those several gods were personifications of the forces of nature. And like nature, those gods were somewhat unpredictable and seemed miraculous, uncontrollable, frightening, and yet at the same time life-sustaining. And people named those powers as gods, and without a lot of scientific information available, that made a lot of sense. It provided some structure and meaning to their lives. Here we're talking particularly about Babylonian and Egyptian cultures. But over time, over a very, very long time, the ancient Hebrews came to a vision of a single but very complex God that incorporated all of those different personalities and forces into one. That's part of why that God of the Jewish and Christian tradition is so complex. Throughout this time, while the understanding of gods shifted, the picture of the universe that we live in remained pretty constant. It was a flat earth, like a piece of paper, with a domed sky filled with stars. Beyond that, all above it and below it were cosmic waters. But a big shift was on the horizon. Around the same time that the Torah was being codified into an official collection for the Jewish people, Greek philosophers came up with a very different view of the world. They came to believe that the earth was a sphere at the center of a spherical universe. And of course, other celestial objects rotated around us, around the earth. These Greeks still believed that the gods would occasionally influence human hearts, but the basic material world that we lived in was a natural world. The gods occupied a supernatural existence. So the first time there was this separation of a natural world and a supernatural world. And that spherical depiction of the universe stuck around for a long, long time. Rome rose and fell, and the Dark Ages passed in Europe. But by the Middle Ages, anyone who thought seriously about the universe saw it as this sphere, this nesting doll. Through this period, the understanding of the cosmos also shifted the Abrahamic faith's idea of God. Instead of being above this flat plane, God became around the sphere. The location changed, but it was still a very clear location surrounding our world. Then came the revolution that I'm sure you all studied and heard about, the Copernican revolution. The Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus suggested that we could better calculate the motion of the planets by assuming, theoretically, that the sun rather than the earth was in the center. Not long after that, Galileo gave us the first telescopic pictures of the stars, and he supported those ideas. And then Newton had the nail in the coffin as he realized that gravity was what held this all together. That all came together in about 100 years. But for 1,000 years before that, people had believed that the earth was surrounded by divine spheres, that God was out there surrounding this nesting doll. Suddenly, the world was pulled inside out for them. we learn that Earth, the ground beneath our feet, was moving around the sun. And out there was actually a vast unknown expanse of mostly space and a whole bunch of stars similar to our sun. God was suddenly without a specific location. It was painful and confusing. I was fascinated this week to learn that Martin Luther, you know, the guy that we think is the change agent for the Protestant Reformation, he railed against the Copernican revolution. He thought it was nonsense. But the new description from Copernicus and his peers won out. The important piece of all of this unfolding is that our knowledge about the universe informs our knowledge of the sacred. And our knowledge of both has radically changed in ways that we never would have imagined. This is all a long way of saying, for a very long time, people smarter than me, and I'm willing to say people smarter than you, have been trying really hard to make sense out of our world. And they had some brilliant ideas, and none of them were perfect. It's okay to be unsure. What I want you to hear even more is, it's okay to try on some different beliefs. Some of them will stick. Some of them may heal you. I dare say some of them may save you. But hold them gently, knowing that some new information, some new shift might help you know even better in the future. If you ask around the room, I promise you will find a fascinating collection of journeys of different beliefs. And I'll offer a couple of my own from this journey. Though I grew up as a Unitarian Universalist, in college I attended a very small liberal Christian congregation. These were the radical, inclusive, really love your neighbors, like all of your neighbors kind of Christians. I found deep inspiration in the way the community put their beliefs into action. So somewhere along the way, I asked to be baptized. I even told the minister, I'm not sure exactly what this means for me. I don't know that I'm a Christian, but I know that this community and the faith expressed here has changed me. And I wanted some ritual to embody the importance of that relationship. Though I sought it with some skepticism, it's a ritual and a truth that still holds meaning for me today. And if that radical little church were representative of all that it means to be Christian, I might be at home in that tradition still today. That's a big if. More recently, you've heard more about the role that meditation and mindfulness has played in my life. In the midst of that journey recently, the lotus flower has taken on a lot of power for me. The lotus is a really common symbol in Buddhism and symbolizes several different things. But to me, the thing that's most important to it is a sense of opening and making space. More and more, that's what my spiritual practice has been. Letting go. Opening my heart and mind and making space for some of the goodness that is out there to enter in. It's a reminder that my task isn't always to go and do and fix. Sometimes the task that needs my attention is to open space for the goodness to enter in. Throughout the twists, I've learned to hold Unitarian Universalism lightly. It is And I think it always will be the tradition that best describes who I am and where I want to be. And yet my personal relationship with the sacred comes first. My meditation practice, my skeptical embrace of a loving God, my sense of awe at creation, those are the basic building blocks for me. So my invitation to you is, try some things on. See how they feel. I hope that along the way, at least a few ideas will stick with you enough for you to hold them gently as your truths. Amen.